Jerusalem, the residents of Abu Dis struggle to negotiate Israel's unfinished security barrier.
كله فاضي
أنا إيش بتصور
الله من فوق ينجينا والله ما إن الله
حول ولا قوة إلا بالله.
This scramble is now the easiest way to markets, schools and hospitals, most of which are on the Israeli side. Mohammed Daneem is returning from the hospital with his young son. His usual route was blocked by an Israeli army checkpoint. When the barrier is finished, residents will have to go via another checkpoint, about 3 kilometres away. But without the proper ID card, many will be unable to cross. Just 30 metres down the road, a delegation of military attachés from around the world is on a study tour of the barrier. Their host is Asher Ben-Artzi, Chief Superintendent of Israeli Police.
Gentlemen, please pay attention. This land is Jerusalem, and beyond the wall, it's Abu Dis. But this is Jerusalem until the line of the wall.
Access to this section of Jerusalem will be strictly controlled, as Foreign Ministry spokesman Itzhak Eldon explains.
So in the 7 kilometers there will be 3 gates so that Palestinians will be able to move from one side to the other. But then there will be a control of the people who are entering to prevent the terrorists will not pass through the gates.
To drive home the point, a chilling exhibit has been deposited next to the barrier.
And here you see the bus which exploded 2 days ago by Palestinian terrorists who infiltrated themselves from the part where there were no fence. So that's a problem, and we need to complete this fence as soon as possible.
The bus seems to hold a morbid fascination for the visitors.
Suicide bomber is crazy, of course. Typical Palestinian terrorist. He doesn't care.
The Israelis need wars to stop this hatred, and this is the only guarantee for the future to build a world of peace and of cooperation.
Israel's wall of peace and cooperation stretches far beyond Abu Dis. The Green Line marks the armistice line of 1949. The barrier stretches far beyond that, well into the occupied territories. Construction began 2 years ago, and it twists and turns its way around Israeli settlements. About 1/4 of the barrier has already been built. When completed, it will run for approximately 700 kilometres.
And then they have a checkpoint and they can check everyone, by nothing.
I'm heading north from Jerusalem to see where the barrier goes through the Palestinian village of Mazha.
Don't worry about it. They don't want to know what we're doing here. And they know.
Outside the village, the Israeli army check our IDs before we're allowed to proceed.
Okay, this is the wall of the house.
Just around the corner lives the Amar family. Once part of Mazha, their house is now totally enclosed by the security barrier.
See, it's a prison. Yeah, it's a prison.
On one side is an 8-metre-high concrete wall that extends for 40 metres, cutting them off from their village. On the other 3 sides is a fence that separates them from the Israeli settlement of El-Kana. When the Israeli army came to build the barrier, 46-year-old Hani Amar was told in no uncertain terms that his house was in the way.
قلت لهم بالنسبة للبيت فيش داعي لا تقيموا البيت تبعي وتحطوا الجدار مطرحه ولا تجيبوا الجدار من الجهة الثانية جهة البلد، خلي الجدار بيني وبين المستعمرة يعني في مجال. قالوا لي باختصار المستعمرة بترضاش، الناس اللي ساكنين هنا بيوافقوش.
Honey says the settlers didn't want the concrete wall near their houses because it would reduce their property values. That's why it was built between his house and his village. The only concession to Honey's family being totally isolated was a small gate inserted near the wall. But access is heavily restricted.
شرطوا علينا ممنوع أي إنسان يزورنا، لا قريب ولا بعيد، لا أخ ولا أب ولا صديق ولا إنسان. قالوا لنا ممنوع حدا يزوركم إلا مرتين في اليوم، أما أنتم ممنوع تطلعوا إلا مرتين في اليوم من الدار.
Honey's limited access to his land, now on the other side of the barrier, means he's had to sell his sheep and his chicken farm. Now he relies on casual work.
المبزة كم يعني خدسي عبودا زي كما يمين بشابون. أخر كخ يوم تصاب كشي للاقي عشان من العبودا. לפעמים אני מגיע בזמן, לפעמים לא מגיע, אז עכשיו אומרים לי סוף החודש הזה אנחנו גמרנו, אתה לא תעבוד אצלנו, תחפש לך מקום אחר.
With no guaranteed income, Honey is forced to rely on the generosity of the villagers to keep his family going. Food is brought to the gate by this young girl, but she's not allowed to enter.
لما اطلع على الجدار بشوف يعني انه من هاي الشك انه العالم انتهى. هذا إلا إشي مأساة بالنسبة لي وحتى بالنسبة لأولادي. أولادي انحرموا يطلعوا، انحرموا يروحوا على الملاعب، يعني بروحوا على المدرسة في وقت محدد، لازم يرجعوا مع بعض في وقت محدد. وشو بدك كل يعني هذا إشي سبب إلهم برضو مشاكل. وهذا هي يعني
الوقت نقضيها قاعدين هين، لا بنشوف حدا ولا حدا بنشوفنا، يعني زي في سجن. هذا يعني ضم أراضي ضم مخهم.
The villagers of Mazha say they've lost an estimated 97% of their land when the barrier was built. That's caused enormous anger in the village, and this march is to protest that the only access to the land, called a farmer's gate, remains permanently closed. The villagers are joined by young Israeli activists. They're part of a small but determined minority of Israelis who want the fence torn down. Suddenly, the army shoots into the crowd. One of the activists is hit in the leg and seriously wounded. The shooting doesn't deter the activists, rather it fires them up even more. The nearby Jewish settlement of Elkanah is just a stone's throw from the demonstration. And it's not long before the storming of the fence becomes a hot topic amongst these young students.
שהם רק גורמים לצרות כאן ושבאמת צריך לשלוח אותם למעצר והתגובה הצבאית מה שעשו זה טוב מאוד למה כי אם הם לא היו עוצרים את זה הם היו עושים את הגדר.
הגדר אני לא מרגיש שזה, אני לא חושב שזה יותר בטוח בשבילנו, זה לא עושה אותנו יותר בטוחים הגדר כאילו. למה? בגלל שזה סתם, זה רק הממשלה חושבת שזה יותר טוב. הם לא חיים פה, הם לא יודעים איך זה באמת.
זה מסוכן בכלל.
גם אנחנו, גם יש לנו יחסים טובים. יש לנו יחסים טובים עם הכפר השכן איתנו. אז הגדר כאילו היא סתם, בשבילנו היא לא עוזרת לנו בכלל.
זה גורמת להם הרבה יותר לרצות לבוא, זה רק נותן להם את החשק לבוא יותר,
הם לא יכולים.
יש גדר. אז איך הם עדיין מצליחים?
לא אכפת להם לנסות לעבור את הגדר.
נגיד אם אני רוצה ללכת לקנות מהם כבשה למשל, אז זה ממש עולה לי זול, כי במקומות אחרים, נגיד אם תלך לקנות בעיר, זה עולה ממש יקר.
צבא ואת הגדר, אז ההורים שלי היו הרבה יותר מפחדים לשלוח אותי החוצה מהבית בלילה. ועכשיו שיש את הגדר והכל, אני חושב שהם מרגישים יותר בטוחים לשלוח אותי בלילה למקומות.
לכן צריך את הגדר שגם ימשיך שלא יהיה פיגועים.
About 30 kilometers from El-Qana is the Palestinian city of Qalqilia. Here the wall runs around the entire city, cutting it off from other Palestinian villages, creating one of many ghettos. This used to be a thriving city, but 4,000 residents have reportedly moved out in search of work. The locals say unemployment is around 65%.
على إنه يضيقوا علينا إنه ما يوصلناش ولا كرش حتى نزهق ونطلع بس لا نموت واقفين ولا نركع هنا بالنظر موجودين على أعناقهم.
Hassan Hussein El Harouf runs a nursery in Qalqilia. He once employed 40 workers, but he's had to lay off half his staff.
منعونا نبيع الشجر في غزة لأن السيارة لما تودي لغزة بتمرق من إسرائيل. الضفط طلع على الاجتياحات وعلى الناس متدمرة، الناس هل بدها تاكل خبز ولا تزرع شجر؟
Because of the barrier, Hassan Hussein does a lot of driving. Part of his nursery is next to his house, but the majority now lies on the other side of the wall.
صرت أخرج من المنزل الصبح الساعة 5:30 الصبح بلف على العمال باخذهم من بيوتهم مثل ما أنت شفتي بعينك وصورتي حتى إني أرفع من معنوياتهم، مش إني أنا كصاحب مشتل نايم في بيتي وإنتوا قاعدين بتطلعوا على الحواجز وعلى البوابات.
It used to take his staff 2 minutes to get to work. Now they have to go through this checkpoint at the farmer's gate, and they're never sure when or if they'll reach their destination. The gate is open 3 times a day for about an hour, and sometimes not at all, for what Israel calls security reasons. Hassan quickly checks on his workers and makes his way back to the checkpoint before it closes for the morning.
راماني بو الاف ل 400 دولار اخي على خطه شيء كل شيء دخشلي 400 دولار مشتلوت
ليش هذا المشتلوت
ليش 5000؟
يشقر لي بو مشتلا بل هي هم مستقلين كما نحن يعني ابو علي في زي هيو نصعين بشامة شاك شني دكوت ياك شاف ايش دراكيب ايش زي
Hassan is now going back home to pick up his son and other children to drive them to school. He says the barrier is affecting his son.
لانه احنا بيتنا قريب على الجدار فوين ما يجي في بالهم يجوا يفتشوا عنا بيجوا يفتشوا. فهذا طفل فكان نايم انا طلبت منهم اني انا انبهه يعني حتى ما يرتبكش منكم ورفضوا ومنعوني ادخل حتى معهم في الغرفه. تصوري طفل زي هذا نام مع امه وابوه ومع اخوانه يصحى من النوم بس الجيش الاسرائيلي فوق راسه بسلاحهم من طفل عمره 7 سنوات 8 سنوات. هذا الولد هذا المنظر اللي شافه او هذا الموقف رايح يعفي اسرائيل منه؟ انا بقول لك لا. هذا الولد هم اللي بدهم يخلوه استشهادي مش انا. وين ما تروحي هذا في وجهنا الجدار، وين ما نروح في يعني هذول طلاب مدارس، هذا طلاب مدارس الجدار في وجههم مشكلة. يعني هذا ابني مثلا اللي بيعرف انهم اليهود اخذوا ارضه، انا بضمن بابني بكره شو يعمل لما يشوف ابوه مقهور، بضمن اعرف شو ابني بده ايش بده ينتقم لابوه. اذا انا بضمن لك اذا كان في نسبة 5% انتحارية مثل ما يدعون هم، كمان سنة بصير 60% انتحارية.
After talking with Hassan, I went to take more footage of the barrier and came across Fatimi El-Baz. She's worked this land for over half a century and says the war has ruined her once fertile garden.
عايشان هذه الأرض إلي لحد أهلت لي الأرض غاد والصورة واجه المية، شوف المية واسترار خربوا الأرض وبعدين الزريعة شوف تشيب بتموت شايفها حر صرنا محننات ما احنا مصدقين عليهم عماية ضربت إن شاء الله.
Fatimi once relied on her crops to survive. Now she depends on food aid from the international relief agencies, as do about 90% of families here.
كل 8 شهر بتفقدونا في شوية طحين مبردات رزات حمصات اللي عمرنا ما كنا ناكله غصب عنا. وبعد
A couple of months after their last protest, the Israeli activists who'd earlier attacked the security fence are at it again. They're heading towards the West Bank for what they hope will be a bigger and better protest in solidarity with the Palestinians. But the Israeli police are several steps ahead of them.
לי קוראים מאיר בנגל. אתם לא יכולים להיכנס לאזור הזה כי יש צף שטח צבאי סגור שאני מחזיק אותו כרגע אצלי ביד. אתם יכולים לראות אותו בבקשה ולכן הוחזרתם חזרה. הוא לא.
יש פה גם יצורים שאני לא מכירה למשל. מי זה?
The bus is escorted back down the highway towards Tel Aviv, where the activists make their point outside the Ministry of Defense.
The wall is being built under the auspices of security and defense, and we want to say that the wall has nothing to do with defense nor with security. That's why we chose this location.
Amid the protest, one elderly demonstrator stands out. This is Zvi Ginsburg. He's defending the barrier.
I came here about I think it was 1 o'clock. When they started to arrive here, I was sure they are going to support me. They say no, we're against it entirely.
He's a radical rightist, as you can see.
Every time there's a suicide bombing, Ginsburg comes out to protest. He believes the fence, or gader in Hebrew, is being built far too slowly.
If it would be a gader 3 years ago, hundreds of Jewish people that were killed would be alive. The gader is the most important thing today for the state of Israel.
Ginsburg is certainly pro-barrier. In fact, he even helped build part of it, as these pictures on his placard show. But I soon learn he's not, as the demonstrator said, a radical rightist. In fact, he's opposed to Israel's occupation of Palestinian land. And he says the fence should have been built along the Green Line and not in the occupied territories.
If they would build it on their Green Line, believe me, there will be no protest, not in Hague, and not in the United Nations, and not in Israel, and these guys wouldn't demonstrate.
Zvi invites me back to his house to meet his wife Ruth.
He protests for all sorts of things. He lives every minute where there's not a television program where he doesn't sit here and watch the program and he writes little notes and then he writes to the commentators and to the politicians about all sorts of things.
And I get answers.
He's very... Sometimes he gets answers.
Everybody answers me. They don't agree with me, but they answer.
Sometimes he gets answers. But that's what keeps him going.
When there's a Jewish state that fights back against these terrorists and is building a fence, for God's sake, a fence to keep out these killers from blowing up buses.
That's what I was demonstrating.
The Hague and the European court is taking us to dock. I mean, have they learned nothing from history?
Do you support the wall?
Definitely. It's only it's going much too slowly.
What?
The building of the wall. The building of the wall. Hagader.
What the wall? What the wall? Not
The
wall.
fence.
The fence.
In parts it's a wall, you just saw
Yeah,
here.
part of
In parts it's a wall and in parts it's a fence.
meters high. We'll take it off, like he said, like Netanyahu said. It will be peace. There's no reason to keep that. That wall is no reason to keep the fence. Sharon,
While Zvi doesn't see the barriers staying forever, he's typical of many Israelis who put the security of Israel above all else.
For security, not for peace. I don't believe in the word peace.
But back in Mazhar, security has ruined Hani Amar's life. He's dreaming of a world without barriers.
وهذا الوقت أنا أتوقع إنه زمان الأجدرة هذه ولا وإحنا كنا متوقعين إنه يعني مش بس الألمان اللي توقعوا إنه جدار برلين آخر جدار، إحنا كمان كل العالم بقى متوقع إنه المرحلة هذه انتهت، مرحلة السدود والجدران بين الناس، والمفروض يعملوا علاقات ويمدوا جسور يعني تعاون ومحبة بين الناس بدل الجدار.
Filmed and reported by Liz Tardich. As Prime Minister of Malaysia, Dr.